The first 100 words, high engagement, suspenseful. The room had not moved in 20 years. Dust lay over the floor like a thin gray frost, softening every angle, dulling every surface, as if the air itself wanted the place forgotten. The investigator paused at the threshold, letting the stale quiet settle around him. A single beam of muted sunlight pushed through warped curtains and struck the outline of a toppled lamp, froze in mid-gesture, a gesture that once meant hurry, fear, interruption. Even now, the room felt paused rather than empty, the kind of space that seemed to breathe faintly when no one was looking. He stepped in without speaking. The old crime scene felt smaller than memory. He had been younger then, quicker with assumptions, slower with doubt. Now he walked with a steady, careful rhythm, the sound of his shoes swallowed by the thick carpet. The air carried an odor of dust warmed by a brief afternoon sun, mixed with something older, paper, dried wood, and the faint trace of perfume stored too long in a closed drawer. It was the scent that brought her back sharply, a presence more intact than the broken outlines of the room. Her name had been Elara Hemsley, age 26. A quiet soul by most accounts, though no life that ends abruptly is ever truly quiet. She had been an archivist at the Santa Flora Public Library, someone who lived among paper and ink, someone who touched old things for a living and kept them alive. Her colleagues described her with words that seemed too gentle to belong in an investigative file: steady, patient, observant. She cataloged small details the way others gathered stories. 20 years ago, Elara's case faded into a cold archive, not far from the rare books she once cared for. Now the file had been reopened, not because of chance, not because of a sudden confession, but because a small inconsistency in a digital scan had surfaced during a routine archival modernization, a fragment of handwritten text missed during the initial sweep, a note tucked behind a photograph, a smudge of graphite, something that did not belong. The investigator lifted the police tape ribbon draped loosely across the room. It had been reapplied for formality, but it sagged with age, barely clinging to its adhesive memory. He searched the corners, letting the space tell its story again. Every object felt like a witness reluctant to recount its final testimony. A soft breeze slipped through the cracked window frame, stirring the edges of a curled paper on the floor. He watched it flutter once, then rest, as if exhausted by the weight of 2 decades. He knelt beside the old desk first. The desk was a simple wooden piece, light oak, 2 drawers, one leg slightly uneven. He remembered the detail because, in 1999, he had brushed against it and felt it rock minutely beneath his hand. He had written it off as irrelevant. Investigators made such judgments without hesitation then. Now he opened the top drawer slowly as though retrieving something fragile. Nothing inside had changed. Notebooks stacked with neat, deliberate order. Pens lined with the type of precision only a person who lived through cataloging could maintain. A pocket dictionary with a frayed spine. All of it clean, undisturbed. He touched each object like a ghost of his former self, tracing the exact pattern of evidence he had once recorded. In the bottom drawer, he found the photograph. It was still there. An image of Elara sitting beneath a sycamore tree near the edge of Santa Flora Park, sunlight caught in the strands of her hair. She was looking down at a notebook in her lap, unaware of the camera. The picture had been taken on a warm evening 3 weeks before everything shifted. He lifted it gently. The edges were slightly warped now, the gloss faded. But the moment inside the frame still felt alive. Wind drifting through leaves, a quiet expression that suggested she heard something in the distance, or sensed something approaching long before anyone else did. He turned the photograph over. There it was, the reason he was here again. A faint line of pencil at the bottom edge, revealed by the enhanced archival scan. Check the second drawer. The handwriting was not Elara's. That detail had required no software. He had spent years examining her journals and notes during the original investigation. Her writing was graceful, curved, patient. The graphite on the back of the photo was quick, pressed hard, slanted slightly upward. Someone had written it in haste. But in 1999, the photograph's back had appeared blank, overlooked, or erased, or simply not visible beneath the shadow of the time's limited lighting technology. The investigator placed the photograph back on the desk surface, feeling a steady tension in the air, as if the room was waiting for him to follow the instruction belatedly delivered 20 years too late. He turned to the second drawer of the desk. It stuck for a moment, swollen with humidity or age. He tugged gently until it slid open with a muted sigh. Inside lay a narrow envelope, yellowed at the edges, one he did not recognize, one that had not been present during the official scene documentation. He froze. A slow inhalation carried the scent of old adhesive and dry paper. His gloved fingers lifted it from the drawer. No writing on the outside. No seal left unbroken. The glue had long dried and separated. He opened it. Inside rested a single sheet of paper folded twice. He unfolded it carefully, smoothing it against the desk surface. The handwriting on the page matched the graphite on the photograph, slanted, quick, urgent. Just one line. He was inside before anyone arrived. His breath slowed. Not stopped, just slowed, the way it did when details began aligning in a firm, quiet pattern. He studied the sentence again, the wording exact and controlled despite the rush. It was not a plea, not a confession, not even a warning. It was an observation. Someone had seen something the night Elara was taken from her own home. Someone had written it down, hidden it, and for reasons still unknown, never come forward. He folded the paper again, slipping it into a fresh evidence sleeve. His mind sifted through the names from the case file. Neighbors, library colleagues, a mail carrier, the park groundskeeper, the landlord who returned from a seasonal trip a week after the discovery. Most had spoken with a plain, steady honesty back then, or so it had seemed. The investigator stood and moved deeper into the room. Near the wall hung a framed series of small, antique botanical illustrations, delicate sketches of coastal plants and wild grasses, likely chosen by Elara to soften the quiet. The frames were mismatched, suggesting she collected them one by one, choosing each for reasons only she understood. Something about the arrangement caught his eye now. The frame at the far right hung slightly crooked, not dramatically, just a breath off level. He approached it. For years, he remembered that frame as straight. He had an old habit of noticing alignment, objects on shelves, corners of paperwork, items placed symmetrically. It was a habit that made investigating easier and living harder. He touched the frame. The glass felt warmer than expected for a room this cool. He lifted it from the wall. Behind it, taped to the plaster, was a thin manila folder the size of a half-sheet booklet. He stared at it for a full second, letting the significance settle. Something hidden deliberately. Something the original team had missed because they never removed the framed art. The frames at the time were treated as personal decor, irrelevant to the immediate incident. But the crooked angle meant it had likely been removed after the initial investigation, or replaced improperly. Someone had returned here since then. Not recently. The dust was even across the surface, but sometime after the police sealed the room in 1999. He peeled the aged tape gently and retrieved the folder. Inside, 3 pages. The first was a copy of a library checkout slip dated May 17, 1999. Elara's hand had signed it. The borrowed item, an old regional census record from 1954. Its due date had been May 24. He remembered the slip vaguely, but it had never been tied to anything meaningful, at least not then. The second page was a partial draft of Elara's personal research notes. She had been studying something, cross-referencing names, drawing arrows between generational lineages, highlighting one surname multiple times. The name Arklin. A local family, quiet, long-rooted in the area, not previously associated with her case. The third page made his chest tighten. A short, hesitant statement written by someone else. A witness, perhaps, unsigned, undated, hurried. She asked the wrong questions. He told her not to look at the old records. She did anyway. The investigator felt the room contract around him. This was not a hint, not a coincidence, not a loose thread. This was a path. A path that had been visible in plain sight, buried under 20 years of dust and assumed truths. He set the pages in order on the desk and stared at the handwriting. The strokes had the same quick, angled form as the note in the drawer and the message behind the photograph. The same hand, the same hesitancy. Someone who had been present in the orbit of the event but never stepped into the light. Someone who wanted to speak without being found. The investigator leaned back slightly, feeling the slight ache of time near his shoulders. The scent of dust thickened as the sunlight shifted across the floor. He surveyed the room again. Every detail seemed sharper now. Every corner carried weight. Every memory felt less like history and more like an echo returning with new direction. He reached for the old case file on the nightstand. It had been left open deliberately, pages fanned in a slow arc. He had reopened it earlier that morning, scanning through the initial interviews. A photograph slipped out from between two pages and landed on the edge of his shoe. He picked it up. This one he had never seen before. Elara standing in the library, surrounded by shelves, speaking to someone whose frame was only partially captured at the edge of the image. A man, tall, wearing a maintenance badge, his face cropped by the camera angle, visible only from the chin downward. He checked the back of the photograph. Nothing written. But the badge number was visible. And familiar. He whispered a single word into the stillness. Soft, instinctive, not quite a conclusion, not quite a question. Finally, the room absorbed it like dust absorbing light. Outside, a car passed on the distant street, steady and indifferent. Life moved while history waited. The investigator placed the new photograph on the desk, beside the hidden pages. Patterns formed quietly, slowly, methodically. The past was no longer silent. It was speaking. And he was listening. The investigator sat down slowly, letting the chair settle beneath him with a faint creak. The desk was a map now, photographs, notes, hidden pages laid out in cautious formation. 20 years of stillness had shifted into motion in the span of an hour. He lifted the photograph of the maintenance worker again. Only the lower half of his face was visible, jawline, chin, a slight shadow of end-of-day stubble. The badge number caught the light, 2147F. It tugged at something familiar in the investigator's memory. Not a name, not yet, but a presence. He flipped through the original file and retrieved the roster of library personnel from 1999. Names listed in small, neat type. Departments, schedules, access codes for restricted sections. He moved his finger down the column for maintenance. There it was. Grant Arkline. The same surname Elara had highlighted repeatedly in her research notes. He leaned back, letting the name settle, not with surprise, more a muted recognition, the kind that follows a long, unspoken suspicion, a cycle finally closing. He reached for the hidden pages again. The statement that read, "She asked the wrong questions," carried more weight now, not because of drama, because of logic, because the quiet pieces had begun fitting together with patient inevitability. Another small sound stirred the room. A soft click. He froze and looked toward the hall. Not a person, just the shift of the old building settling in the evening, wood contracting with the temperature drop. The sound had existed 1,000 times before. He had simply forgotten its rhythm. Still, it nudged his awareness back into sharpness. He breathed slowly and returned to work. The logical chain was simple. 1. Elara checked out a 1954 census record. 2. She highlighted the Arkline family line. 3. A witness wrote that she asked questions someone did not want her to ask. 4. A photograph captured her with a maintenance worker, Grant Arkline. 5. Someone hid evidence afterward, behind a frame, inside a drawer beneath another photograph. These were not coincidences. These were decisions. He picked up the envelope again, studying the faded paper under the shifting light. Whoever left these notes had been careful, choosing places that blended into domestic quiet. Drawers, frames, the back of a photo. A person who knew the house well, or spent more time in it than anyone realized. He opened the file further. Buried between incident reports and early interviews was a name he had nearly forgotten. Micah Wren, Elara's neighbor across the narrow lane. A man who lived alone, who repaired vintage radios, who kept odd hours and quiet habits. He had mentioned hearing something that night, but his statement had been vague. Indistinct sounds, a soft thud, voices he could not place. The investigator read through the transcript again. Micah had described seeing someone leave the house that evening, someone tall, wearing a work jacket, moving swiftly toward the service alley behind the houses. But he could not provide a clear face. Only the outline, only the uncertain shape. The team had dismissed it then, too general, too common a build. But now the photograph showed a similar outline. And the badge number linked directly to one man. He placed Micah's statement beside the new notes. They aligned in that quiet, devastating way facts sometimes did, without flourish, without doubt. He checked the time on his watch. The evening light had shifted toward a softer gold, fading fast. He knew he should leave soon to log the new evidence at the temporary analysis station. But something held him to the room, an echo of responsibility, of something he had missed long ago. He scanned the walls again. One frame still hung slightly off-center, even after he had removed the hidden folder earlier. He stepped toward it and straightened it gently, more out of habit than necessity. His fingertips brushed the wood and felt a tiny indentation on the back. He removed the frame fully and turned it over. There, pressed into the rear surface, was a faint graphite imprint, an impression from a note once written on the wall itself before the frame had been placed. The pressure from the pencil had transferred the curvature of the letters into the backing. He tilted the frame to catch the fading light. 3 words emerged slowly, ghosted and partial. He returned later. The investigator swallowed quietly. Not fear, not alarm, just clarity. This new detail did not contradict the logic of the previous notes. It sharpened it. Someone had come back after the first moment, after the initial silence, after the house emptied, after the authorities left. Someone had returned not to remove evidence, but to hide something they believed would point toward the truth later. Yet they never stepped forward. The investigator set the frame gently on the floor and reached into his bag for a small, portable scan light. He used it to illuminate the wall behind the frame, scanning across the faint texture. No ink remained, only the pressure imprint. But it was enough. He photographed it for documentation and exhaled. The room now held more evidence than it ever had during the original search. And none of it was chaotic. It was organized with almost deliberate restraint. He turned back to the desk and opened another section of the file, interviews with Elara's colleagues. He skimmed through statements from the library's reference department, the circulation team, the administrative office. Most spoke gently of her, focused, thoughtful, dedicated. She had been researching regional land ownership history for a planned exhibit that year, nothing controversial on the surface. But one colleague's note stood out. A brief line from Miriam Lyle, assistant archivist. Elara mentioned she had found something unusual in the old records. She said it bothered her. She didn't explain. The investigator paused. He remembered the conversation with Miriam at the time, her soft, hesitant tone, her uncertainty about whether it meant anything. It hadn't seemed enough to pursue further then. Just a vague impression, an archivist's typical unease about incomplete data. But now, paired with the hidden notes, the photograph, the highlighted surname, it formed a pattern. He picked up the draft page of Elara's notes again. Her handwriting circled the Arkline family name repeatedly. Below it, she had written in faint pencil: inheritance dispute, land transfer irregularity, check secondary files. Then a second line underneath: there is a missing signature. He stared at the phrase. A missing signature in a historical record could imply a forged transfer, a concealed claim, a family disagreement that rippled across decades. Not dramatic, just a quiet detail that might unsettle someone invested in maintaining a particular narrative. Someone related to the Arkline line. Someone like Grant. He checked the old library employment timeline. Grant had worked in maintenance from 1997 to 2000. He left abruptly, citing relocation. There were no further notes. He had never been considered a central figure. No record of conflict with Elara. But access to the building, access to her research area, and familiarity with the old census records placed him within the circle of relevance. The investigator stood, letting the atmosphere of the room shift around him again. The dust in the air glinted faintly under the low sunlight. The scent of aged paper hung heavier now, as if the room exhaled its long-held breath. He walked toward the bedroom doorway, stopping at the threshold. A memory brushed against him, a recollection of his first time standing here in 1999. Something had weighed on him then, an odd feeling that the room hid more than its stillness revealed. But he had been rushed. Pressures, timelines, assumptions. He had moved on too quickly. Now he stepped inside. The bedroom was smaller. A simple bed frame, a narrow dresser, a cork board pinned with postcards from places Elara wanted to visit, quiet towns with coastal views, small libraries in other states, tranquil hiking paths, dreams of simple movement beyond shelves of paper. He approached the dresser. The top drawer still held the same items as before: folded clothing, a small cedar box, a thin perfume bottle resting sideways. He opened the cedar box. Inside lay a collection of handwritten quotes from books, small lines she found meaningful. All peaceful, all calm. He set the box back carefully. The second drawer held notebooks, journals. One had been left slightly ajar, its spine resting against the side panel. He slid it out. The first pages contained routine observations, lists of tasks, reminders about cataloging, notes on future projects. But near the center, the tone changed. Elara had written. He asked why I needed old signatures. I didn't mention his family name. He seemed uneasy. Below it, I must check the 1954 file again. The investigator felt the weight of the logic settle firmly now. Elara had stumbled onto something she did not realize carried weight for someone else, something tied to the arcline lineage. He flipped the page. A loose sheet fell from the notebook and drifted silently to the floor. He knelt and picked it up. A sketch. Elara had drawn a rough map, simple, quick lines showing the layout of the library's archival storage. She circled the section that held the older census files. Next to it, she scribbled a note. He lingers near this area after hours. The investigator exhaled through his nose, quiet, thoughtful. This was not melodrama. It was a sequence. A pattern of observation from a dedicated archivist who noticed small things without assuming their meaning. He returned the notebook to the drawer and stood in the center of the room. The earlier note, he was inside before anyone arrived, resurfaced in his mind. It suggested not an intrusion after the event but presence beforehand, access without attention, familiarity. A maintenance worker had keys, access, routine reasons to enter. He went back to the living room, gathering all evidence into the case folder. The photograph of the badge number was logged. The hidden notes were secured. The impressions behind the frame were saved. He paused once more, letting the room settle into quiet. The suspense had shifted into something more grounded, logic closing its own circuit. He touched the doorframe on the way out, feeling the grain of the wood under his glove. It was smoother in some places, worn faintly in one specific patch near waist height. He inspected it. A soft indentation, not deep, but unnatural compared to the rest of the wood. As if someone had leaned there often, someone waiting in silence, someone familiar with the place. He photographed it. Then he stepped outside. The air felt cooler, open, unburdened. But the weight of the discovery remained with him, steady and quiet, as he closed the door gently behind him. The past was no longer a void. It was a structure, measured, patient, deliberate. And its final room still waited to be entered. The investigator walked to his car with the case folder pressed flat against his palm, as if the thin paper might try to escape. Evening settled over the suburb in a pale, muted wash. Houses lined the street in patient rows, their windows glowing with early lamps. Nothing dramatic, just light where families prepared dinner, drifted into their routines, kept life moving in steady increments. He sat in the driver's seat but did not start the engine. Instead, he opened the folder again beneath the dim interior lamp. His breath fogged slightly on the glass as he leaned forward, scanning the badge number, the highlighted surname, the rapid scrawl of the note reading. He returned later. The pattern had shape now, not sharp, not loud, just persistent. He turned the photograph of Grant Arcline toward the light again. Only the lower jaw visible, but the badge number undeniable. He traced the digits with a slow fingertip. 2147F. Maintenance, evening shift, access. He reached for the thin laptop on the passenger seat and opened the municipal records database. A few keystrokes brought up employment archives, address listings, relocation documents. The screen glowed in the quiet car. Grant Arcline, current address, Willow Bend Apartments, Unit 3C. Residence established, 2008. Employment after relocation, private maintenance contractor. He studied the record. Nothing alarming, nothing overt. But logic did not need alarm, it needed alignment. He closed the laptop, turned the ignition, and eased the car onto the street. The tires hummed softly over old pavement. He drove with the calm focus of someone following a line drawn in faint pencil, straight enough to trust, unclear enough to tread carefully. Willow Bend was only a few miles away on the edge of Santa Flora. The complex sat against a small slope, its architecture modest, flat roofs, narrow balconies, beige walls marked by time. A few porch lights flickered on as he parked. He stepped out and listened. Wind moved through a cluster of aging pine trees, leaving a soft rustle in the air. Somewhere, a television murmured faintly behind a closed window. A single car door shut in the distance. He approached Unit 3C. The corridor was quiet, narrow, lined with welcome mats faded by sun. He stopped in front of the door. A small porch light overhead buzzed softly. He noted the marks around the keyhole, standard usage wear, nothing unusual. He knocked softly once. Silence. Then a faint movement inside, slow, measured. The door opened a crack. A man in his late 40s stood behind it, tall, shoulders slightly rounded from years of lifting equipment, expression guarded but not tense. Time had softened the edges of his features, but the lower jaw matched the partial photograph exactly. "Evening," the investigator said quietly. Grant nodded once, hesitant. "Do you have a moment?" the investigator asked. A pause, then the door opened a little wider. Grant stepped back, allowing him inside. The apartment was simple, clean. The scent of old wood polish lingered faintly. A lamp near the corner cast a warm, low light over the space, leaving the edges dim. The investigator stood in the doorway for a moment, letting the room settle around him. The air carried the faint hum of a small refrigerator and the soft ticking of a wall clock. He did not sit. Grant moved toward a chair but remained standing beside it, hands resting loosely on the backrest. "You worked at the library," the investigator said, voice steady. Grant's nod was small. "Long time ago." "Do you remember Elara Hemsley?" A longer pause this time. Grant looked toward the floor briefly, then lifted his gaze again. "Yes." The investigator drew the photograph from the folder and placed it on the table. Grant's eyes shifted to it. The lower jaw in the image matched his perfectly. No denial. "You were present near the archival section after hours," the investigator said, keeping his tone neutral. Grant's fingers tightened slightly on the chair's back. "I did routine checks," he murmured, "sometimes late." The investigator nodded. "You spoke with her about the 1954 file." Grant's expression changed. Nothing dramatic, just a brief constriction around the eyes. "She asked questions," he said quietly, "about signatures, about land transfers. I didn't think it mattered then." "But it did matter." Grant looked away. The investigator placed Elara's draft notes beside the photo. The circled surname, the reference to a missing signature. "She was researching something connected to your family," he said. "Something small, something most people would overlook." Grant exhaled slowly, as if a weight decades old rested in that single breath. "There was a dispute," he said. "Family property, old documentation. My father handled most of it. He was particular about it, very particular." The investigator listened without interrupting. Grant's voice carried a quiet restraint, neither defensive nor confessional, just factual, careful. "She asked me about it once," Grant continued. Not accusing, just curious. She said she wanted to verify a detail in the census records. He paused, rubbing a thumb along the wooden chair. I told her it wasn't important. I told her to leave old paperwork alone. And she didn't. Grant's silence answered for him. The investigator studied him for a long moment. Someone left notes, he said. Hidden ones, drawers, frames. A witness who never came forward, someone who saw more than they said. Grant's eyes lifted slightly, uncertain, then settled back into quiet. I didn't leave anything, he said. I didn't write notes. The investigator believed him. The handwriting in the notes had a hesitant curvature he doubted matched Grant's firm, practical script. Then someone else saw something, the investigator murmured. Grant shifted, unease passing over him like a faint shadow. I wasn't there that night, he said. Not like that. The investigator waited. Grant's hands curled against the chair slightly. I came back, he said. Later, after the officers cleared, I shouldn't have, but I wanted to see if anything was left, if she had written something down that pointed to me, or my family. His voice tightened at the edges, but remained steady. I found the frame crooked. I fixed it, that's all. The investigator let the words settle in the room. They matched part of the puzzle, but not all. Grant's return explained the crooked frame, but not the notes behind it, not the message in the drawer, not the impression on the wall. He closed the folder and looked around the room slowly. The apartment held nothing unusual, nothing out of place. A soft tap sounded at the window. A branch brushing the glass. Grant flinched slightly at the sound, not fear, but a reflex honed from years of unease. The investigator stepped closer to him. There's something you're leaving out, he said quietly. Not accusation, observation. Grant nodded, almost imperceptibly. He walked to a small desk against the wall, opened the top drawer and retrieved a thin object, a folded paper envelope, worn at the edges. He held it for a moment before placing it on the table. I kept this, he said, for too long. The investigator opened it cautiously. Inside was a fragment from a page, a torn corner of old census records, the portion that would have included the missing signature Elara wrote about. The tear was uneven, jagged, deliberate. Grant exhaled. I didn't remove it from her file, he said softly. It was already loose. I found it during a maintenance check a week before everything happened. I didn't know she had noticed the absence yet. He paused, his voice steadied. But someone else did. The investigator looked at him carefully. Who? Grant shook his head. I don't know, but someone else lingered near the archives, after hours. Someone I saw once walking away when I entered. I assumed they were a patron who stayed late. I didn't think about it. The investigator's breath moved slowly in and out. This was the small detail, the quiet, logical twist, not a dramatic revelation, a simple one. The missing signature did not implicate Grant alone. It pointed to someone else with access to the archival section. Someone who used the gap in documentation to their advantage. Someone who didn't want Elara uncovering their connection. A second name faint in the file. Micah Wren. Not just a neighbor. A volunteer technician at the library for a short period, with access to the archival room for a special project. Overlooked because the role seemed peripheral, because his statement seemed simple, because he blended easily into quiet spaces. The investigator closed the envelope. You saw him once, he said. Grant nodded, briefly. I didn't think it meant anything. It was enough. Not certainty, but alignment. The investigator gathered the evidence again. Grant watched him silently, shoulders lowered under the soft lamp. As the investigator turned to leave, Grant spoke once more. "I never meant for anything to happen," he murmured. "She was gentle, she didn't deserve trouble." The investigator paused. "No, she didn't." He stepped out into the cool night air. The sky above the apartment complex held a washed-out clarity, faint, stars barely visible. The wind brushed gently through the trees. The case folder felt heavier now, not with confusion but with the quiet weight of direction. He walked to his car, opened the door, and set the folder on the seat beside him. His hands rested on the wheel for a moment as he watched the light from Unit 3C fade into the distance. Nothing was resolved, nothing easy. Logic had pointed him forward, not closed the path, but it was enough to move, enough to rebuild the timeline with honest light. He breathed in the quiet night. Justice, when it finally arrived, would feel procedural, measured, mechanical. But the memory of Elara, her notes, her quiet persistence, her careful way of studying the past, left something human behind, something that resisted closure, something that stayed. The investigator started the engine. The night shifted around him, and the past, patient as ever, opened one last door.